Welcome everybody to our fourth AI in 30 session. It's great to have you all here. This session is being recorded and it will be available later in a couple of days or so on the same place where the other sessions are. You will receive an email with all that information. Today we are lucky to have Dr. Karl Kodweis from the College of Pharmacy, and he's going to be talking today about AI agents and assistants. If you got questions, please drop them on the chat. These sessions are fast. You know that they go quick, and if we have time, we will address some of those questions. If not, we will pass them to the presenter so he can actually send you a quick answer about that today. Dr. Kodweis, it's all yours.
All right. Well, thank you, Frederica, for kind of organizing this. I think these have been really helpful to kind of get people's feet wet with this concept of AI. And so today's conversation will be focused primarily on AI agents and assistants. And as Federico kind of noted at, we're going to try to hold the questions for kind of the end so that we can be more targeted with what we're covering today and we can get through what we're trying to. But if you have questions, go ahead and throw them in there. And then again, if we don't get to them, I am happy to reach out individually one-on-one to discuss this. So AI agents and assistants. So a few disclosures before we get going. So I do use AI generated content and editing assistants. And so I just like to put that disclaimer in there. And then there are some products and platforms that are referred to, but these are mainly for illustrative purposes, and I don't get any kickbacks or anything related to the use of these platforms. It's just helpful to kind of show some real world application of this. The other things with this is that with the AI, it's consistently changing kind of what its capabilities are. And so what we'll cover today are accurate as of today's presentation. However, they may change or update as this technology kind of adapts. And so just keep that in note. If you go and try to make an agent a couple months down the line, there may be something to kind of update yourself on related to it. And then this presentation primarily will draw on stuff from UT's specific products, but I'll kind of give you my approach to it as well. So this just is a few disclaimers for that. But let's start talking about what an agent is. And so AI agents and assistants sometimes get synonymously put up together, but basically these are systems that utilize large language models and other types of machine learning algorithms to basically engage with users in order to identify some type of intent. And so these agents are used to carry out different tasks. They can have limited actions or functions. Sometimes we can have them work autonomously or kind of in the background to retrieve, analyze, and comprehend data. But there's two different kind of categories of these where assistants are very directed by the user and you tell them kind of how to operate, whereas the fully autonomous agents has a little bit more of a thinking framework where it goes through multiple different rounds of coding so that it can operate instead of you having to put a prompt in every time. And so for today, we're going to be focusing on this assistance category, but just to kind of give you the whole outline of what this looks like. So we have our chatbots, which are the traditional chat GPTs or Copilot, where you just message with a platform and it uses text to interact with. Assistants have a specialized foundation which they look at prior to responding to a prompt, and they can add a little bit more nuance into what you're looking for from these. And so that's where assistants are functioning more as like a co-pilot would, as opposed to its autonomous partner. And then we also have the autonomous side where we have ChatGPT came out with their agent function or a deep research type of use case. And these are typically where you give it a prompt, it'll operate and kind of run its calculations for 5 to 7 minutes, and then it'll give you a report at the end of it. And so the primary thing that we'll talk about today are more of these assistants because autonomous agents can get really seedy real quick. And so we'll keep it surface level for today. So when we're talking about agents, there's a framework where we're looking at two different domains. So we're looking at how much user involvement goes into the use of this agent. And then the other piece is how autonomous is it, right? So how much flexibility or leeway are we going to let it do within some level of monitoring that we're going to let it kind of complete on its own. And so for today, when we talk about UTverse, we're going to look at agent as an operator and as a collaborator, meaning that we're going to use this as a tool, as a way to augment our teaching style as opposed to replacing it. And so that's just kind of where things go, but it can be very complicated if we drill down too far into the weeds. And so for today, I'm going to walk through some steps of how to create one of these agents in UTverse, and I'll pull up the program after I go through these steps so that you can kind of see how these things operate. But as we begin, there's a few steps when we're creating the assistant. And so an assistant is going to perform some type of task or goal that you want the AI to create, but it is specific to the role that you assign it. And so the first thing to do is to figure out, what do you want your assistant to do? Do you want it to help schedule things? Do you want it to help interact with students in terms of like tutoring? There's a bunch of different ways that we can use assistants, and starting off with a clear objective of what you want it to do will help kind of facilitate that. Then we'll kind of show you how to get to the building platform in UTverse, where you can start kind of establishing what the personality and all of that will look like. And then we'll go through some different types of ways to tailor it, to adjust it so that it makes hits the tone that you want it to hit. And then we can then share it and publish it on UT's platform. So when we're figuring out the assistance goal or its problem, this is kind of where I start. And so the first step is to figure out, what is the primary outcome you want it? Is there a single outcome you want it to achieve? Who do you want to use it and to get function from it? Is there a specific subject area you want it to focus on, or do you want it to be broad? And so you can kind of see with these questions that we can use them in a multitude of different ways. I can use them with a student for tutoring support that meets their learning needs. Or for me, I can use it as a personal assistant that can help generate what to do on a given day based on my preferred method of, setting this stuff up. And so starting off with the goal is kind of that first step, or that first thing to do before you hit step one, I guess. Step two is where we're actually going to locate the platform. And I'll show you this once we get through these steps. But here you're going to log into UTverse. And if you have your computer pulled up, you can kind of follow along with these, but I'll also show you how to get to it. You'll sign in with your UT credentials. And so all faculty and staff should have access to the UTverse. And then we'll have you click the settings, AI assistance in the top left, and then click on create the assessment. And so for this, we're going to get to the screen right here, which is very similar to the one that you should see on your browser. If you're using a Mac or you're using something that's not, I would recommend using either Google Chrome's extension or to use something like Internet. I don't know. I don't think it's called Explorer anymore. I think it's called Edge or something, or Mozilla. Safari sometimes can make this a little bit difficult. So you logged onto the website, you sign in, and there should be a little gear in the top corner where you can click on, and that should then bring you to this screen where it's got a few different options. So on the left-hand side, you'll see the category of AI assistants, which you'll click, and then we'll click Create Assistant. And so this is where we go into the bones of what these look like to then figure out what is the goal that we want it to achieve. And so when you're in that building of the software, this is where we have our general settings. And so here we can create a profile. And so the way that I've broken this up is you have the profile, which is the name, the description, and the avatar, which basically give parameters to the bot that don't influence its output. So these are information that somebody who wants to come behind you and look at what you created, what your bot does, what each of these agents can function as. That is what the assistance profile is. And so you can call it whatever you'd like, you can describe, but it helps the user identify, is this the agent that I want to perform the task that I need it to do? Now we get into then the personality, and the personality is where you're going to dictate, how is this agent supposed to respond? And this, it can be super specific or it can be super general. But this typically follows the same type of prompting that I believe Federico did in one of the first sessions, which we're talking about prompt engineering. So you're giving it a task, you're giving it something that it needs to complete, you're giving it constraints to operate within. And then the next step is to choose a suitable model. For the purposes of this, you're just going to stick with the traditional model that we have. The other ones are lighter models and they're cheaper to run, but that's beyond the scope of this presentation to get to that degree of flexibility. But again, to kind of go over the profile components, the name kind of gives you a title or identity. The description gives a brief overview of what the user can expect. And so this is just a description for people that are looking at the agent. What is this able to do, or what should it be able to accomplish? And the description and name are typically also involved in what they call the gallery. And so we'll show you what that looks like as well. And then the avatar, it didn't actually stay on there. I had a picture of my dog from back home on there when she was a puppy as the avatar, but you can put any avatar you want on there, but that's just mainly an image or more of the cosmetic side. Now, where the brain of this agent kind of resides is in the personality. And so the personality is where this is going to be, think of it as a prompt that is sent to the AI system before you even input it. So what this does is it acts as kind of like a veil or a cover so that then when you put your prompt in there, it'll then follow these parameters to then give you something that you want it to look like. And I'll explain what that means in a minute. But what the persona or personality allows you to do is to kind of dictate if you want, a tutor that talks like a pirate. Here is where you'd put something in there about here's a math tutor that speaks with a lisp and has, a pirate type of tone. And so then everything you get out of it, regardless of whether you ask the weather for the day or you ask it to grade something, will have the tone of a pirate. And so that's kind of a wild example. And I don't know how often many of y'all use that. I kind of wanted to use it now, but this is something where you can kind of be creative with it. But one thing that UTverse has done that's actually very helpful is they've created the personality generator or the persona generator. And so this is a chatbot within a chatbot that helps you optimize the personality for whatever agent you're trying to do. What you'll do here is you'll kind of look at different things and it gives you tips on how to make a better prompt or personality. It gives you some ways or tips on different ways techniques can be applied to it to optimize the output. But if you're somebody who's just getting new to or just getting into this AI space, this is a really good tool because it's very plain language and you can converse with it in order to generate the prompt that you want for the personality. And then it allows you to just copy and paste it into the agent and it's right then and there for you. So this is a very helpful tool, especially with something that you're going to create from the ground up that you want it to meet a certain use case. And then after we create the personality, we can then go in to create or adjust our advanced settings to make it more pertinent to what we're looking at. And this is where we can change the style. So if you want to be more creative or you want to be more balanced or you want to be more scientific and accurate, you can kind of adjust those. And then there's a setting which is allows you to pick either the maximum response tokens or the maximum context tokens. And so these two concepts I'm going to recommend you don't touch them right off the bat unless you know what they are, but a just an overview of the advanced settings. Response styles, so creative is really good for idea generation or brainstorming, but it typically has a higher likelihood of causing what we call hallucinations, where it creates something that's not factually correct and you have to kind of go in there and so pay attention to that. Balanced is kind of like you're talking to somebody on the street. It's very they know what they're talking about, but they may get one or two things wrong here or there. They may be a little bit more verbose. And then accurate is think of something like a academic writing, where you're much more targeted, you're much more concise, you're much more topic or component heavy. You're not as kind of fluff. And so you can kind of adjust the context or response windows to get either more response from the bot, less response, or to add context. But tokens act as kind of like a credit system or a currency for coding, transmission, and processing, meaning that there's a limit to how much the chat bot is able to retain in its memory. So like if you put something in at the start of a chat, but then you have an entire Harry Potter series of text in between what you put at the start and what you then want to do in order to get back to that first context, the context window needs to be longer. And so it's not a one for one, each word is one credit, but the context is functions as the memory of this. And so if you put something earlier on in the chatbot and it doesn't remember that, then when you ask it follow-up questions related to it, it may forget it, may hallucinate on things that it doesn't really know and it just thinks it knows the answer to. And so the way that you can kind of get around this is you can actually start a new chat within the bot in order to reset the context window. So if you're noticing that it's getting really long, and you can use multiple chats within the same agent. And so we'll show you what that means in a minute, but you can have multiple, I guess, threads of chats going back and forth between one agent, if that's helpful. And then then the next kind of steps once we kind of get all the bones and the organs in place is to kind of test it, to adjust it, and to validate it. And this is going to be specific to your use case that you determine. So if it's something where you want to create a rubric that, looks at student submissions for something and highlights these specific components, this is where that you would then test it. Is it responding the way I want it to? Is it throwing things out there that I don't want the students, if they're using this or they're seeing it, that it'll make them either feel like their data is getting compromised or whatnot. But this is where you then feed it something that you classify as a really good response. But then you also look at the other side where you look at it, is it you give it a bad response and hope that it can distinguish between those two cases. And you do that multiple times and you adjust the persona, the settings, and all of those things until you get a response that it meets your goals. And so depending on how specific you want to be, this may take a little bit longer, but the more time you spend on this side, the less you have to spend adapting what it pumps out. And so that's the piece that I think is if you spend more time in the beginning stages of what exactly do I want it to do? How do I want it to respond? What do I want it to look at? This is a really good way to do that. And then once you're good to go, you can then publish it to the UT verse, and this will then allow it to store in your memory of available agents. And so we'll show you where that pops up, but keep in mind that any new interaction or message that is sent within each of these counts as a new attempt, but the personality will remain consistent, right? So if I have three different chats with this one agent, but I'm talking about a pre-class, a post-class, and an in-class, I can then add the context within each of those windows in order to keep the context separate between them. And then if you're feeling so bold and you want to share, there's assistance that you can then put up into this marketplace where again you'll be able to see the avatar that they select, the title or name, and then a brief description of what it can function as. And so I'd recommend that once you get in here, if you don't really know kind of what use cases you can use, this is a really good spot to see what other people have kind of done, and you can download them to your UTverse, adjust them however you see fit, and then implement your own version of them. And so I thought that this was really helpful in there. But the sharing options, again, you can either have a public gallery where you're putting it into the UT gallery where they're able to somebody who works in the office next to you can then go and download the bot and use it just at baseline. Direct sharing gives a key that somebody can then put into UTverse and they can access that agent. And so that's really helpful for like students or something if you want them to use the software that you create for them. And then you can turn on the assistant active or inactive or on or off, which then will turn off the assistant for not only the showing it in the public gallery, but you won't actually be able to access it in your own version if that's turned off. And so before we get to the demo specific piece of this, and I'm actually doing okay on time, I think. And so these are just some tips that I've kind of put together that is just when you're building an assistant, these are in addition to what we talked about with the building itself, things to kind of look at. First, you want to have as defined of an objective or scope for what you want it to do. What is the problem you're trying to solve? Which is the learners that it's going to interact with? And what are the goals of its output? Now, for me, I tend to build it iteratively, and I'll start with a minimal prompt and start building it out based on what it generates. But if you want to put the time into it to generate your prompt before and then just refine that larger chunk of text, that works as well. The persona generator helps a lot with that, kind of putting that into the right order. I'm always in this AI is going to augment my abilities. It's not going to replace it. And so I want to create a bot that I'm always kind of in control of and I create the user experience. And that's what the next one is, where I want it to welcome me. I want it to ask specific questions before it starts the encounter to make sure that it meets my needs. And so that is all has to be explained in the persona that you pick for the agent. And then you just go through and you deliberately and standardize each of these responses in order to make sure that it's given what you want it to, right? And so you can control the parameters. So how much context do you want it to remember? Tokens, do you want, students to be able to put their entire essay in there to evaluate, or maybe just a section to then touch up? These are things that, depending on where you work, where you practice, who you teach, you'll have different use cases. And so, unfortunately, I can't give you this is a silver bullet that works in all of your cases, but I think that the agents is probably, when we're talking about AI, one of the more universal, you can find things that work in different settings and domains. Can I get a thumbs up if you can see UTverse? Y'all see it? So I'm bypassing the screen where I sign in. And so here is just what it looks like once you log in with your UT versions. And so UTverse is, again, the AI assistant chatbot that UTK has kind of developed that we use in-house that has a lot more privacy related to it. And I think that it's a really good tool to start kind of your use building. And so the first step you do is you come up here to this little gear in the top corner. You'll click into it. And then here, I already have it clicked on AI assistance, but if it's somewhere different on yours, just make sure you click it there. And then I click on create the assistant. And so this brings up the generating pieces of it that you then go through and build. And so here we have the name. We'll call this Patchy, the grammar pirate. He's a scallywag who provides useful advice on, I don't know, papers. And so here is where I would then take the personality and say, I want to create an agent for students who use and to provide targeted feedback on only grammar and context um, issues. And he needs to speak like a pirate. So then I add that in, and what it'll then do is it'll walk through and it'll look at my request and say, okay, so what are some things that we can then add to this in order to make it more along the lines and more useful for this? And so this may take a little bit of time, but in the side here, this is where it gives you some tips. And so you can select, do you want it friendly, professional, analytical? Do you want it to be more formal? Do you want it to be casual? What is the detail level? And what you're doing with these is you're just adjusting those tokens and the context window, but it's doing so that you don't have to drag and drop those different items related. But it also gives you stuff like tips for great personas. Make sure that you consider the tone and the voice. Make sure that you talk about specific areas or expertise that you want the AI to work within. And so what it should do is, and this is taking a lot longer than I had hoped. But once you get that, it should then be able to copy and paste into it. And so I'm just going to go with one that I've already got kind of outlined. But this is one that I've used previously where I have the pre-class that I want for a specific session. And what I do is I'll give it my pre-class materials and I'll ask it to generate 5 to 10 multiple choice, fill in the blank, true and false questions that will then assess whether a student understood what was covered in the content. And so here I have it that he's an instructor or that they are an instructional designer. They specialize in pharmacy education. They want I want him to look or her to look at different Bloom's levels. And this is where you just be more kind of speaking to what you want it to look like. And then you can come down here to the different windows, and I'm just going to pick for one. And then this is just the advanced settings. So I'm not going to change anything too much here, but that's how you would adjust each of those. And then to get access to it, this is then you come up here to next to your name, and it will show up in this list of available agents. And so here, if I click into the pre-class wizard, I can then ask it. So let me pull into, I'll upload something from my files. We'll do it on this one. And so if I upload this document and say generate test questions, it'll upload the file and it'll apply those parameters where it'll give me what it's supposed to do. And so here, what it's doing is it's just uploading it before it's able to run its process. Okay. And then what it's going to do is it's going to take the prompt that I put in, generate test questions, and it's going to think through based on what I put in there. And so just to provide context, this is a paper that's looking at faculty learning communities and different ways that scholastic synergy can work. And here, what it'll do is it's going to ask me specifically for the types of questions, where it's pulled from, and then I ask it to give me an answer key related. And so this is then just going to run through and ask it what or answer what I'm asking it to. But then what it should have started off with, sorry, it's still running its calculation, so it may take a little bit. The only thing that I haven't been able to do is to kind of get the math function to work where it doesn't look like it's squeezed together. And so math may be a limitation for these. But if I didn't give it anything to operate within, it would start with these questions. So this is all written in that personality where I'm going to have it up. I'm going to upload all the things I wanted to pull from. And I then want to answer, I need to answer these parameters that I wanted to follow in order to help increase the output. So what types of questions do I want to see? How many of each do I want? If I have multiple materials, do I want them distributed between the materials or do I want them from a single source? And then what is the level of learning? So I teach first year pharmacy students, but you may want to look at higher levels of learning based on, higher upperclassmen. And so that's kind of what you can kind of expect from it. It's not the best demo, but that kind of gives you an idea of what to expect with these agents and assistants. But keep in mind that this is different for each of the products that you're looking at. This is specifically to UTverse. And UTverse has the limitation where you only have 1,000 characters that you can put in there. But again, they use that persona generator that is supposed to help create some of that for you. And then that way you don't have to kind of start from scratch each time. And so just to kind of wrap up, and then we can answer some questions. I know we got a couple minutes left, but agents can be very useful and versatile. But until you get in there to practice and to kind of build them yourself, you really don't know what you're getting into. UTverse has gotten helpful resources, especially the persona generator that we went through, that I'd recommend kind of taking a look at. But I guess my biggest piece of advice is just to get in there, play around with it, and to see if you can use it for a specific case. I will leave this up, but I will answer. Are there any questions that I can address or answer related to this? I think I did okay on time. So you got a few
You
minutes.
did much better than I did, Carl. Thank you so much. There's a couple of questions related to, one is related to the personality. And the question is, can you do the same as Gemini AI, where you ask it to be Roger Ebert? Like you ask it to be some specific person that it's well-known person.
Yeah. And so the way that I would think of it is these large language models are good on just general data. And so if it's a general person from history that there's a whole lot on, then yeah, like Abraham Lincoln, or if I wanted, Harriet Tubman type responses, yeah, you could put roles in there like you do. And it would just kind of function as you said in the prompt engineering
Mhm.
session, where it would just be assigning the role, and then it would be kind of like an actor taking on that role.
Yeah. Also, could you design it as a group where there's a series of people that you can have a discussion with? So the assistant takes the different personalities to answer the same question or to kind of like go back and forth with you.
So I don't think, to be honest, I don't know if I can answer that
Hmm.
100%. I don't think UTverse has that function.
Hmm.
But I have seen other people through different platforms create like a skeptic agent and one who's super like a peer-reviewed type of response where it looks at and it sends the output to two different agents and then it combines it at the end to then give you a well-rounded, here's what worked
Hmm.
really well on this one. But it was specific to give the positive feedback in these areas, give negative feedback in these areas, and then it coalesces at the end. And so that's where, yeah, you can have multi-agent frameworks put up, but I don't think within one agent that you build or assistant within UTverse, you could have multiple people within that single agent.
Hmm.
That'd be something we could try. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a couple of questions, and I'm going to address these. Our next session is about UTverse specifically and some of the functionalities and privacy protocols that it has. There's a couple of questions about things that you can ask the assistant to do. Can it combine multiple research papers and create a presentation? So that's a very targeted question. Can an assistant do that for you?
Something like Copilot, where you're
Mhm.
creating different Copilots within their expanded scope, can. Yeah, because it talks with PowerPoint and you can have the researcher and you can string them up so that they all communicate with each other. That's where you're creating an agentic workflow is kind of the term that they use for it. But on UTverse, I don't think you have that luxury. It can take a document that you put in there and give you text based, like here's what you would put on each slide. But in order to create the PowerPoint itself, to design it, to create like a separate file, the only one that I've seen being able to do that is Gemini with their Google Docs or that Google Suite. You can create the slides in there. And then ChatGPT allows something with Canva. And then I think Copilot just has their own in-house PowerPoint function that they have for that. So,
Yeah, that's kind of like the next level, right? That
mhm.
agentic, like functioning with multiple products, it needs to be in the same suite. That's what I've seen too. Thank you for your time, Carl. There's a couple of more questions that I will send you from the chat as well. Thank you all for your time today. Thank you for attending. Our next session will be in a couple of weeks, and it will be specifically focused on UT functionality and specifically the privacy features that make it a safer way to interact with an AI, so you can actually have some of your own material and you can feel and trust that it stays within the system and there's no big privacy concerns like with some of the other tools where you need to look into it very specifically. We will have this recording in less than a week in the same page where the other recordings are living for the AI in 30 for future use. And you will get a follow-up email with a toolkit that Dr. Kodweis has put together for AI agents that hopefully can serve you to continue exploring. Thank you so much, and we hope that you all have a great day.